People do things simply for their interpersonal relatedness. Just because to be with another person is important. They do it for a sense of identity. There are fascinating surveys of free software developers. I'm sorry, I'm going on and on.
No, please.
There are fascinating surveys. Rishabh Ghosh did one 2 or 3 years ago in Europe. Karim Lakhani did one, Lakhani and Wolf from 2004. Because the first line response to why free software developers do what they do was, well, it's reputation, it's expectation of future work because you'll show yourself, and it's solving a particular problem. In all cases, easily at the end of the day convertible into a self-interested model where you've got an individual defining their own desires and needs, acting in collaboration with others in ways that then get translated back. It turns out when you actually ask people, what do they say? They say over 75% identify being a free software developer as a central aspect of their identity, of who they are. Many more people talk about the fairness of giving back to the community that gave them so much. Many talk about solving problems, yes. The sheer pleasure of solving a problem and being intellectually engaged. And then, to some extent, reputation and payment, etc. So I think identifying the social relational aspects and the sheer need to be part of sociality as part of it, the capacity to form social identity around a common project is significant, and then also the sense of what's right, what's fair, and what's reciprocal. Not underestimating the fact that there are certain things like guilt and shame that at a lower level of mechanisms drive us to do these things sometimes, of course, as well.
So Ben out on the board has raised a question tied to what we're talking about that seems to be developing some legs here. He says, on the point about YouTube potentially expropriating the value of user-created content, how is it not barter? Users get free distribution of their content. There's plenty of pay-for-service streaming platforms as well. So what's the role of barter in the economy we're mapping out here in terms of pure production and Web 2.0?
The extent that you're talking about platforms of individuals who give of their creativity to each other without having bad feelings towards the platform that makes money, that strikes me as not barter. There's no accounting, there's no direct exchange. The other to whom things are given is actually another user, not the company. And so I'm not sure what barter gives, what purchase barter gives us on understanding the relationship. Gift does a little better, but even gift in some sense has this sense of almost direct reciprocity, whereas in some cases, so Rishabh Ghosh a decade ago, talked about open source software as cooking pot market. It's more, I put mine into the cooking pot, it all comes out in the stew together, and all I know is that at the end of the day, it will be really delicious. But I don't really account who gives what or how and how they work. And I suspect that that's a better metaphor than either barter, certainly than barter. And with regard to gift, I think it does describe a lot. But I think even that, it describes a portion, not everything.
So their question about status is probably worth taking up before we shift gears too much. Is a top-ranked question there. Status is becoming day after day the big asset, a new currency. Isn't the status motivation even more powerful than the economic motivation? The tension comes from using those different motivations to one goal.
So there are, how many ways should I disagree with this statement? Let's see. While status is important, it's not the only story of what it is that's happening online. Reputation, yes. But it's also a sense of who I'm with and what I'm doing and the pleasure in what I'm doing. I mean, the motivations are much more diverse, and I see actually the social relational ones that are non-hierarchical, but rather the mutual commitment, not so much the status, but the reciprocity that is more at risk from the introduction of money. And the sense of identity and the interpretation of what I'm doing as something that is outside of the commercial because it's me. It's my form of creating my identity, which is not status. It's not positional necessarily. It's relational. That's where I think money really creates the problem, because even both on the functional side. So you can imagine what's functional social capital and how does it distinguish. So you can imagine a situation where you walk into a hiring partner at a firm, and let me just use law since I occasionally have to refer to it, at a law firm, and you put a check on the table and says, hire me. You're out the door. But if you say, oh, my uncle sent me, or so-and-so, your old colleague, suggested that I come talk to you, that's the totally normal thing to do. Both of them are forms of capital. The critical thing to see about them is that they're non-fungible, and in fact, in order for social capital to be effective, it has to be non-convertible into money, which is why we consistently have some systems that are resistant. So if you introduce money, you kill the social capital side. The other thing is the identity. If it's fully fungible with something else, then something that is done for money has a much harder time being constitutive of my identity, although it's true that we do work and that's constitutive of our identities too, so it's not a complete miss. But if I'm taking a particular set of actions outside of my normal life to add a quirk to who I am, then if that becomes money too, it starts to get down to who I am is a unit of production. And so I see there, more than with status, the tensions with money.